Hello, everyone, and welcome to this very special Via Satellite webcast where we reveal for the first time our 2021 10 hottest companies of the year list. My name is Jeffrey Hill, Executive Editor Via Satellite and with the Satellite Show. Thank you so much for joining us. During this webcast, I'm going to be talking to the two masterminds of this list, Via Satellite Editor-in-Chief and Group Content Director Mark Holmes and Via Satellite Managing Editor Rachel Jewett, about why they made their selections and what they feel makes these particular companies special in 2021. I'll start introductions with my longtime colleague and go-to intelligence source for the industry, Mark Holmes. He is a creative force behind many of our most successful events and news features, including this one. Mark, thank you so much for being with us this morning. Can you explain the history behind this 10 hottest companies list and also how it's different from Via Satellite's other distinguished awards like the Satellite Executive of the Year and Technology of the Year?
Sure, and welcome today, everyone. It's an interesting story, actually, because the 10 hottest companies idea was not something that had been thought about for months and was a part of a careful strategic business plan for new content. It was very much almost, we were looking for an idea for our January 2019 publication. We were starting to think about different structures for content. We wanted like some looser structures. I think we were all influenced as an editorial team by listicles, and we knew that they were popular. And then I think we just had one editorial meeting, and this idea just came out, and we thought, that sounds pretty interesting. We think we can do it. So yeah, it was a bit of a bit of a surprise. It very much was a last minute thing. It wasn't something that we'd been thinking about for months and months. It was really something that came almost in a very spontaneous way and has obviously developed since then. To the second part of your question, why is this different from Satellite Executive of the Year, Satellite Technology of the Year, and other awards that we do? As you know, Jeff, for many years, we really only had the one award, the Satellite Executive of the Year, where we rewarded a particular executive in the industry. And I think one of the challenges we've had as a publishing company is there are many great stories in this industry. There are many great companies in this industry. There are many great people in this industry who are not necessarily the CEO of their company. So I think it's a great opportunity for us to really put the spotlight on some of the great work the industry as a collective is doing, and doing it in a way that the industry really embraces. So it is a little bit different. I think it shows a change in I think almost like the culture of Via Satellite, that we want to be more inclusive. And so this is an idea that's since January 2019 has grown. It's been by far and away our most popular piece of content, and our editorial team, including you, Jeff, have all come up with great ideas for these companies. And I think for all three times we've done it, we've had very solid lists.
Yeah. And as you mentioned, the Executive of the Year and Technology of the Year are really like performance-based awards, right? Like proven. Whereas this list is sort of like, you can be unproven, but as long as you're generating a lot of excitement, right? And so which brings me to my next question, which now I have the pleasure of introducing our other colleague on the video, Rachel Jewett, Managing Editor, who just in the span of a year and a half since joining our team has already become one of the smartest reporters and best writers in our industry, constantly challenging my assumptions and prevailing probably at least like 95% of the time. Rachel, so as I said, what do we mean by saying a company is hot and putting them on this list? What are the criteria for this specific list?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. So as you said, yeah, some of the companies on this list can be more unproven. So companies that are bringing an idea that isn't as established in the industry to the table and saying, we want to make a commercial case. Companies, we've looked at what they've done over the past year since we put out our last list, their expected activity in 2021, companies that have a really large market share in the area that they play in, companies that are bringing really transformational technology to the table, companies that are bringing like new next-gen technology. We look at really exciting deals that have been signed over the last year and overall buzz and excitement. So, coverage in different press outside of Via Satellite, if the leader of the company has made a big impact So that's what we're looking for. And the one big caveat is that we haven't put companies on the list twice yet. So this is our third list, and if the company was on the list in 2019 or 2020, then they can't be on the list for 2021.
Yeah. And, just to let everybody know, I normally don't like top 10 lists because I always feel like they're all about like kind of clickbait and getting people to kind of click through your site. But one thing I will say is that you guys put a lot of thought into this list, like even just as much as the other executive awards. I think, it just kind of shows that like this actually is pretty well thought out, and there are criteria we have to follow. And I know just by watching the process, we can start with as many as 20 and have to like kind of work out, who the top 10 are. So before we focus on the new list, let's take a look at last year's list and see how these companies fared. So last year we picked Relativity Space, Telesat, Lockheed Martin, ThinkCom, Hyber, Capella Space, Dish Network, ST Engineering, Ursa, and Planet. Mark, I'll start with you. How did our 10 hottest companies from last year do this year?
I'll try and go very quickly through some of these. Firstly, in terms of Telesat and ST Engineering, iDirect, we'll be talking about those, I think, a little bit later. So I'll leave those out of the conversation for now. Let me just go through one or two of the other ones sort of very quickly. Relativity, great year. Contracts with NASA, DoD, unveiled plans for a fully reusable entirely 3D printed launch vehicle, raised close to 1.2 billion in financing over the last 6 or 7 months. A real cool player in the launch space. ThinkCom deals with the likes of Inmarsat, well positioned in the IFC sector, which looks as though it will hopefully be bouncing back, and very well positioned in that sector. Hyber is an interesting one, the Dutch IoT company. It's launched some new services like Hyber Heavy, which is a heavy equipment monitoring solution, and Hyber Hilo, which is a subscription service for IoT-enabled remote oil and gas well monitoring. So some really cool like technology service type announcements. Ursa Space, which provides a one-stop source for commercial SAR imagery, has recently launched image services, and again is doing some really interesting stuff in the imagery side, particularly in like the oil and gas sector. Capella is a company that celebrated its 5-year anniversary in March this year. In May of this year, it released the first light image from its latest satellite, just 5 days after it was launched by SpaceX, and now is now working with around 70 international channel partners, serving imagery to government and commercial organizations. Dish Network, an interesting choice last year, did a really cool deal with Amazon Web Services and is working with them on sort of cloud and 5G. Has an interesting balance of subscribers, 11 million pay TV, 9 million mobile subscribers. So that's definitely a very well-known company, obviously, but interesting how they're pivoting to 5G. Planet, always a much talked about company in our sector. They've recently joined the newly formed European Carbon Plus Farming Coalition to accelerate progress towards European Green Deal carbon neutrality goals. When was the last time you heard an announcement like that in the satellite sector? 100% growth across all of its product lines over the last year. Again, a real terrific company. Lockheed Martin, I mean, they put out huge numbers of announcement. I'll just pick one or two. They've recently signed a deal, I think, with the German Space Agency regarding a new command and control system, which is it's a space tracking, a space debris system, and also Omnispace to explore jointly developing 5G capability from space. So that's in a nutshell what a lot of our companies that we chose last year have been up to.
All right, Rachel, you mentioned that we wanted all new companies on the 2021 list. So if we were able to put companies back on the list 2 years in a row, which one of those companies or which of those companies on the 2020 list would you have put on the 2021 list?
Yeah, I would say that the big LEO constellations are really driving so much conversation in the industry, and the past year was a huge year for them, and it's only going to be bigger. So I think SpaceX could honestly get on the list every single year. We named Gwen Shotwell our Executive of the Year for the great year that SpaceX had in 2020. Just seeing how rapidly they've built up their Starlink constellation, and in recent months now we're seeing wider ambitions for that with the mobility arena. And then Telesat, with their finally making the big announcement on the Lightspeed constellation, revealing the specs of that, the deal with Thales. From my perspective, seeing what our readers are interested in, these are the companies that our readers are reading any content that we put out about these companies. So I would put them on the list if we could.
I think expectations and performance metrics for both are very, very high. I wanted to highlight Quilty Analytics conducted a recent assessment of both constellations, Telesat and SpaceX. For Starlink, they said being an end-to-end retail service provider will likely have to generate yearly revenues that exceed the global SATCOM industry's total broadband data revenues today in order to generate attractive investment returns. And for Telesat, they said they will likely need to generate a run rate revenue of $2.5 billion to realize a 10 to 12% return on investment. And to achieve this target, it must grow its annual data revenues, currently at $300 million, by about 8 times that figure. So lots of buzz around the two companies, but I guess people are watching them because they have a lot to prove in the next few years here. Mark, what 2 of your companies that we've put on past lists would you put on 2021?
Again, probably no real big surprises, but I'm going to mention OneWeb and ST Engineering iDirect. OneWeb, I'll try and take a slightly different angle from Rachel, because we know obviously the LEO constellations, but I think the interesting thing from OneWeb is almost like the story behind it. The rise and fall and rise again. So a company that at one stage looked as though it wasn't even going to exist just over a year ago, and the fact it's got new owners, an interesting combination of new owners, a new management team. It's just a really interesting company to watch. It's I just think with its history and what's happened, we've got a new CEO, Neil Masterson, there, so it would be very it would be interesting to see how they do under these new owners, and how they can in theory still bounce back, because it wasn't that long ago where the prognosis for OneWeb was not good. So there's still a lot to prove. I'm also going to mention ST Engineering iDirect. We know that particularly in via satellite, the ground segment is always a popular discussion, and we know ST Engineering iDirect, just with working with them over the last few weeks, there's some very ambitious goals, not just in terms of their products and their technology, but they also really want to further the conversation in terms of the ground segment. So they're working with us on a program called New Ground, which is a little bit different from New Space, and the real goals of this is to really get the conversation more, accelerate it in terms of the ground segment side of it. It's great talking about these LEO constellations. I lose track of the numbers of thousands of satellites that could be launched, but the technology needs to keep pace with it on the ground. So, and it's going to be up to a company like ST Engineering iDirect and others who've been on this list as well to really help enable some of these hugely ambitious business plans. So I think when I look back at the lists over the last couple of years, those 2 definitely sort of stand out for me in terms of ones that could very easily be put back on lists relatively quickly. And likewise with Rachel, it's very, very tempting to put SpaceX on every single list. I think it's probably good for via satellite and good for the industry if we don't do that. But obviously they're they're a massively exciting company, and they help drive eyeballs and conversation in this industry, which can only be a good thing.
Yeah. So just to review, OneWeb constellation currently stands 218 satellites, about 80% of the way to what they need for initial service, and they're targeting full service launch in 2022. So maybe even a consideration for next year's list. ST Engineering, 5G, lots of work in 5G and expansion in Latin America, new LTE maritime services. Lots of reorganization happening within that company internally. We'll actually get a clearer picture of the iDirect new tech business within ST Engineering next year, because I believe they're reporting those 2 businesses within a satellite unit. I think that before they had been putting them in aerospace, which kind of combines some of the aviation businesses that were really like kind of suffering throughout the pandemic. So we'll get a clearer picture of what iDirect and NewTek contribute to the overall company. Mark, I just mentioned COVID. Considering the industry spent the entire year in quarantine, do you think it was easier, more difficult than usual to come up with this list this year?
I was actually thinking about this question. It might sound a strange answer, but I actually think it was easier this year. And it's not really COVID related. I just think it's more because the industry is in a really buoyant place right now. I think there's many exciting companies in the industry. It's not an industry that is, particularly stale or going through a quiet period. There's lots of investment. There's lots of creativity. There's lots of even in the list even in the companies we've spoken about already on this. We're talking about imagery. We're talking about LEO, GEO, different types of operators, so actually in a way, I don't think it was more difficult to come up with companies, because I think there's many companies that could make the list. That the hardest thing, if anything, was choosing just 10. I think I think we all started with a list of around 20, and actually getting the list firstly from 20 to 15, and then from 15 to 12, and then 12 to 10. That was where it was good, but the industry is clearly in a good place right now. I mean, there's lots of the best thing you can say about the industry is that it's becoming almost more mainstream. I mean, you see in popular culture with programs like Space Force on Netflix. Space all of a sudden is cool again. It's attracting young people, and we're seeing creativity that we just didn't see in the industry maybe 10 or 15 years ago. So actually, choosing 10 hot companies, actually coming up with 10 isn't hard. It's figuring out which 10, because we could very easily, there could be another 10 or 20 companies that we could have easily, you could have made a good case for being on this list, but we can only, like Satellite Executive of the Year, like Stossi of the Year, we can only choose 10. It has to be 10 hottest companies. So I don't really think COVID made, personally, I don't think it made a really huge difference to the selection process. Obviously, all companies were affected by COVID, but business plans are taking shape, and yes, there could be some delays in launches and things like that, but overall, I think as everyone talks about, the industry is set for an exciting 2020s.
Rachel, one of those big changes that we saw this year were the emergence of special purpose acquisition companies, specifically in the space realm. You've written a lot about SPAC mergers and interviewed several CEOs from some of those companies that are looking to form SPACs, and a couple of them are even on this list. If this were 10 hottest topics in the space industry, would SPACs be at the top of that list?
I don't know if it would be at the top of the list, but SPACs would definitely be on that list. They've been a hot topic, not just in space, but in the entire finance sector, as there's been way more in 2021 than there were in 2020 and from before that. We haven't seen many space companies go public over the past few years, so it's been really exciting to see a number of startups take that leap. At the same time, that comes with very high expectations, and we're about to get a lot more information about some of these companies as their mergers are completed and they become publicly traded. So over the next few months, I'll be watching as they complete their mergers. Another tidbit from this week, it's been reported that Virgin Orbit is in talks for a SPAC that may be announced soon. So that's very exciting. We'll be watching for that. And overall, it gives public investors access to these investments that before have really just been the realm of venture capital.
And journalists. It's also exciting for journalists to be able to report on the financials. Okay. All right. So let's take a look at the new list. All right. For this year, Mark, I'm going to start with you. How about you pick one company that you feel makes a really strong case on this list and briefly explain why you picked that company?
Okay. Oh, my company of choice is going to be ISI, a company that is located in Finland, and even that a Finnish-based space company sounds pretty cool. But they're doing so many really cool things and helping in areas of like border security, flood monitoring, oil spill cleanup. We know there's a lot of companies in this area, and actually you could easily pick a 10 hottest companies just in Earth observation and imaging. But I think they're a really interesting company. It's the deal they did with Swiss Re in terms of advancing flood risk management, assisting disaster response, was a real. I know we use this term a lot, but I thought it was a real game changer of a deal. I thought it, we often talk as journalists about when are we going to see deals with new types of companies, not just shipping companies, cruise companies, airlines. And I think that was a great example. So I kind of I think even now a lot of innovation is, people see it coming out of Silicon Valley, the west coast of the United States, and of course there's many great companies there. So having a company like this based in Finland doing some really interesting stuff, and it's not just what they're doing. I mean, these are issues that impact humanity. These are issues that impact global community. If you get like a faster response to a flood through insurance, that helps people's lives massively. So it's a company that that I've only really got to know a little bit recently through some interviews and looking at them a bit more, but they're one I would. They were one of my strong picks for the list this year.
ISI is stepping into an increasingly competitive market in SAR, right? So you got Capella Space, Ursa, Black Sky, Maxar through Orbital Insight. Government still the big customer here in the SAR world, but all of these companies looking to expand and claim some of their own territory. Yes or no, Mark? Do you think ISI's choice of the finance insurance sector is the top prize of all those new markets?
I wouldn't necessarily say it's the top prize. I would say it's certainly up there. And it's interesting you name all of those companies, because as I said, you could make a case for any one of them and maybe some others besides to be on our list. I think it's a tremendously exciting sector. I think it's something, because of the way the technology has progressed. It may be that you get more deals in this sector with different types of companies like insurance companies. Right. I think that's the exciting thing. I'm not, whether insurance is the top one, I'm not so sure, but I know it's going to be right up there. I think that's it's something the satellite sector has talked about for a few years, and this is evidence of of this happening. So yeah. It's a great deal, it really is.
I'll throw my hat out there and I'll say yes, I think it is. But maybe I'm wrong. Rachel, what's your top pick? Oh, I think you're muted.
Yes. I would just add one comment, not to be a detractor of ISI. I think they're a great company. One challenge that they have is they do have a U.S. subsidiary, so to compete for U.S. government contracts. But as you said, the U.S. government is one of the biggest consumers of imagery. So being a company that's headquartered out of the U.S. is a little bit of a challenge in that market. But as we said, they're breaking into different exciting markets. Mm. So I chose Swarm for my pick on the list. Swarm is really disrupting the Internet of Things IoT connectivity from satellite. So they are vertically integrated, their satellites are super tiny, and the pricing is what is really so disruptive about them. The connectivity per device is $5 a month per device. And when I interviewed the CEO, Sarah Spangolo, earlier this year, she said that companies can spend just $500 a month with Swarm, but they might have been spending $10,000 a month with legacy providers. So there are a number of companies that are trying to get into, like new space companies trying to disrupt IoT connectivity. I see Swarm as kind of the furthest down that path and really has the potential to disrupt the business of legacy players. And what I think is really exciting about this, this is a connectivity that it really can make life better. It can make help businesses make better decisions. And so being so cheap, you can get people who haven't been able to afford satellite connectivity to have that data in remote areas, to be able to have that. So I think Swarm is very exciting.
Now, Rachel, the business model you described in your interview with Sarah, I mean, it's dependent on lots of small transactions, right? If you're doing like, monthly subscriptions at $5, and I think their satellite modems priced at $119. You're talking about lots of small transactions in wide-ranging market. So that requires a wide-ranging marketing outreach campaign to build a community. Do you think Swarm is up to that?
I mean, I don't know for sure, but I would say I would say they're up for it. And yeah, that is true. One of the things that Sarah Spangolo pointed out was that they are vertical agnostic. So they're not saying, this is particularly for this industry. People are able to take that tile and put it in any type of IoT device that they have, which is really great potential. But at the same time, you hope that people will come to Swarm if they need that capability. So there is a challenge there.
Okay, Rachel, I'll ask you to make one more pick, but being that this list, as we described, can include unproven companies, that it's based on buzz and sort of excitement and expectations. Rachel, if you had to pick one company on this list that you felt had maybe the highest expectations to meet or had maybe the most challenging road ahead for itself in the next year, which of the 10 on this list would you choose?
Yeah, for high expectations, I would choose Mynaric. I think they are trying to do something really challenging with the optical intersatellite links. This is widely seen as like the next frontier of technology, and it can really revolutionize data transfer in space, because optical is so much less complicated than RF. And so Mynaric, they're on, Telesat has contracted them for the DARPA project, the Blackjack project, and there are going to be really high expectations for that. And Mynaric is trying to bring laser terminals into widespread use. So that's going to be the bar. Are they able to get a large constellation deal and make space lasers a reality?
Yeah, they've secured a couple of profitable terminal orders with SpaceLink, Cloud Constellation. I know they're working with Telesat for DARPA, Blackjack. Another thing too is, SpaceX confirmed they're using laser technology, right, for intersatellite links. Yeah. So there's a widespread validation of this technology throughout the industry. Mark, what company do you feel has the most to prove?
I'm gonna mention Satisfy, which I think is a tremendously interesting company. It's been going less than 10 years. They've done some really interesting deals in the last year with the likes of OneWeb and Telesat. OneWeb in terms of in-flight connectivity, but there's still major question marks. Despite what the LEO players said at our Connected Aviation Intelligence event last week, that they expect to get 90% of the market in aviation in the next 10 years. I think it was SpaceX mainly, and then Telesat following in. But I still think that's very much open to question in terms of their ability to get to market, because other players are already in that market. Other players have already got deals in that market, and whether the likes of OneWeb and even SpaceX and Telesat, I think the jury is very much out in terms of how much of that market they're going to get. 90%, that certainly caused a bit of a stir when it was mentioned last week. So that will be interesting. Even though they've had an encouraging last couple of years, but this is a very tough space on many levels. There's a lot of innovation, as we've been talking about, on the antenna and the ground side. So will there be enough business for all of the players? Who are going to be the winners and losers in this sector? It's nothing really against Satisfy as a company, but it's just they're operating in a very tough area where there are a lot of other great companies that have been on the list the first 2 years, companies that we've considered, companies like ThinkCom that have won Satellite Technology of the Year. So I think I think they're a great company, but it's certainly not going to be easy for them. But we wish them all the best.
Interesting note about Satisfy is Ted Danson, the actor, just recently featured that company on his show, Ted Danson Advancements, I think it was with Ted Danson. So yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so you have to check that out. Yeah, I mean, yeah, they've got demos, Telesat and OneWeb, and I know they just secured an IFC terminal deal with OneWeb. So they definitely have a lot to prove, and maybe we'll see if they win this decisive ground systems contract with some of those big LEO constellation systems. So we've named 4 so far. So ICEYE, Swarm, Mynaric, and Satisfy have made the list this year. Before we mention the rest of the 6, very quickly, I'll start with you, Mark. Were there any honorable mention companies that didn't make the final 10 list but were very, very close? Pick one and briefly explain why.
Well, I'm going to stick to my European roots and say Eutelsat. As obviously a company that, as I think most people know, I know very well and have talked with them many times down the years. They had a very interesting last 12 months, because there was a lot of speculation in terms of what they were going to do. We know that SES has gone big into MEO. We knew what Telesat was doing, for example, but you're sort of wondering, well, what's Eutelsat going to do? I mean, and then all of a sudden we saw the investment in OneWeb, which was really sort of in some ways sort of came out of nowhere, but sort of seemed to sort of shape where they may be going in the future. They've also, Rudolf Belmer, the CEO, has also been, I think, of all the CEOs of quote unquote the traditional big operators, has spoke more about broadcast and sort of the resilience of broadcast going forward. So, I definitely think they're sort of one to watch. I think you're starting to see the bones of a very interesting future strategy there. It'll be, how much will they be involved with OneWeb? How's that collaboration going to pan out? What will be the future mix of a traditionally very strong broadcast business and getting into other areas? And they've done some other really cool stuff, like the Connect stuff in Africa, and so it's always a big talking point in our industry in terms of how some of the big companies will evolve their business model. And it always feels like SES have got that balance with like the 50%, that getting towards that balance of 50% networking, 50% video. Yeah. And Eutelsat for me is, I think there's always been question marks around Eutelsat.
Well, let's hold that thought for a minute. Let's hold that thought for a minute and move on, because we want to get to the rest of the list here. But one thing about Eutelsat I wanted to add is that they're getting killed by delays, right? Like almost all of their big satellites have been pushed back into 2022. I mean, most of that's due to the pandemic, but that's one thing. I mean, that's kind of some of it's out of their control. Rachel, what would be your honorable mention?
My honorable mention would be Rocket Lab. I know that they had a failure last July, and that was their first failure of the Electron rocket. And then unfortunately, a few weeks ago, they had another failure. But at the same, and this is happening when other small launch providers are coming to market, like Virgin Orbit. But yet, the Electron rocket is still the leader in small satellite launch. But Rocket Lab's vision is much larger than just launch. Peter Beck wants to make it an end-to-end space company. And we're starting to see that vision take shape with the Photon satellite that they have on orbit. And then just this week, they won a Mars deal with NASA. So I think that Rocket Lab is really one to watch. They didn't make the list this year, but we are, watching Rocket Lab, and they took a SPAC deal, so we're about to see more information about them as a publicly traded company. So we're excited to see how things develop at Rocket Lab.
There's certainly a lot of attention being focused on them. I mean, the launch market press can be a bit sadistic. We love they love either success stories or crushing defeats for the challenger. But just ask SpaceX; they were in the exact same spot, right, in 2005 and 6, and look where they are right now. So that'll be exciting to watch. All right, so we've got 6 companies left. Rachel, I'll start with you. I'll ask you to name 3 more of the companies that made our 2021 list and very, very briefly explain why they made the list. So I'll start with you.
All right, so we're getting to revealing the rest of the list. I'm revealing Astroscale, Leo Labs, and Spire. So I'll talk briefly about Astroscale first. Astroscale has really raised the profile of space debris as an issue in the industry, and they are trying to commercialize removing space debris and deorbiting satellites. So the ELSA-D removal spacecraft launched earlier this year. That's a key mission for Astroscale. So the whole industry is watching to see what comes out of this mission. They recently have announced plans for their next project, which is the ELSA-M. So all eyes are on Astroscale to see how they are, if their technology lives up to the hype, and how they're going to commercialize this end-of-life services and active debris removal. And then similar in the space sustainability area, we've got Leo Labs, which was in, I believe they won Startup Space in 2018. And we'd say they've been an investor darling ever since. And so they offer a platform where constellation operators can track their Leo satellites. It gives people a good visibility to protect their assets in space. And this is really important as there are more and more and more satellites in low Earth orbit. This past year, they opened full operations at their Costa Rican space radar facility, and they're offering tracking on satellites and orbital debris. So a very key service from Leo Labs, and we're excited to see where they take it. And then I will close out with Spire, another remote sensing player. So Spire isn't collecting imagery. They are tracking RF signals specifically for aviation, maritime, and weather. Those are all different types of signals. And what I think is interesting about Spire is, so they are fully deployed. They're not still launching their satellites. They have about 100 on orbit. So the cost of building and launching satellites is going to be less and less a part of their business. And as they have this infrastructure built, so they're actually, even though their satellites are small, they are one of the largest, they operate one of the largest constellations with around 100 satellites. So they are now selling their own infrastructure as what they call satellite as a service. So letting people put either digital or physical payloads onto their satellites and then operating it as part of their constellation. So this is an interesting thing that, people are talking more about satellite as a service. And it sounds like Spire is jumping in with that as a side stream of income. So we are, interested in Spire and put them on the list.
All right. Thank you so much, Rachel. We'll summarize the list at the end, but Mark, take us away with the final 3 companies on our 10 hottest 2021 satellite companies list.
I know, it's exciting. Only got 3 places left. Who is going to make the final 3? This next company, I guess, won't be too much of a surprise that they made the list. We all chose Kymeta. I think for fairly obvious reasons. Kymeta's had a buzz around it for years and years, and I give them a lot of credit, really, because it's not easy generating levels of excitement necessarily around the ground stuff, and Kymeta has been a big talking point in the industry, particularly with the recent launch of its U8 electronically steered antenna terminal. It's one of the most exciting companies out there in this area. So, and there's always been a lot of talk about the potential of Kymeta, when these products come out and how they might impact the market. And now we're very much getting towards sort of prime time where we really get to see what Kymeta is about. And I think the industry has been excited to find out about, whether Kymeta will live up to the hype over the last couple of years. So I think this year was was absolutely the right year for them to be included on our list.
All right, who's next?
Who's next? We go back again to my European roots, Thales Alenia Space. What the great thing, I mean, just a general observation, the great thing about this list, and I think we've all alluded to it, is that companies big and small can be on this list, companies that have been around decades or companies that have just started up. And it's very important that the list reflects all types of companies. Thales has had a really great year. The deal with Telesat in many ways probably was the deal that all of the companies were looking to get, but I think it's the diversity of the deal flow that is most impressive for me. You know, they're doing some really cool stuff with Microsoft on the cloud, that they work with, like the European Space Agency. They're involved in 5G trials. So for people that are, and we know there's lots of them in our industry that are really into the technology and how the technology might develop. I think you know, even though this is a company that has been around for a huge number of years, you know, I think they're very much a standard bearer for the European satellite industry. And I think you know, that they had a great year, and I think they're very deserving to be on this list.
All right, and your final pick.
Final pick, who gets in at number 10? I think we need a drum roll here. We all chose Virgin Orbit, and I don't think that one will come as a big surprise to many of you that are wondering. I mean, whenever Virgin enters a market or puts its brand, or whenever Richard Branson, it always creates excitement, whether it's, you know, Virgin Galactic, Virgin Orbit, or even in non-satellite areas. There is almost an expectation for them to be fast-paced, fast-moving, innovative, doing things, you know, differently to others. It's great to have satellite companies with the Virgin brand. It creates an interesting dynamic for our industry. They're building, as we know, an impressive global launch infrastructure. They're getting ready to transition into commercial service. So it's a very much you know, a key sort of 12, 24 months for them. Like a lot of launch companies and some that we talked about earlier, there's always a lot of conversations when new launch players enter the market, and, you know, are they going, and we saw, I mean, we went back many years with SpaceX, you know, about changing the market. And, you know, it wasn't that long ago, Jeff, and you can probably remember when we really just spoke about Arianespace and Proton, and now we have this hugely dynamic market, and they're definitely a player that everyone has got their eyes on in terms of what they're going to be doing and stuff. So I think, you know, they're a very good choice, and a good one to complete the list.
Okay, so there we have it. We have Virgin Orbit, Thales, Kymeta, Spire, Leo Labs, Astroscale, and we have SatixFy, Mynaric, Swarm, and ICEYE. You know, just overall, Mark, Rachel, how do you guys feel about this list? I'll start with you, Mark. How do you feel? Confident?
Yeah, I mean, the whole point of this list is to create talking points within our community. We want people joining in the discussion, agree, disagree, but just get involved in the conversation. You know, this is our most popular piece of content. A lot of people enjoy this, and you know, I think it's a great conversation. I think everyone, if you ask this question, will pick 10 different companies, and that's perfectly okay. But we feel this is a very strong list. We had some very you know, good discussions on this, some agreements, some disagreements, but you know, I'm very confident. I think as an editorial team, we did a great job, and we think I think it's a pretty decent list.
What about you, Rachel? Do you think these are the 10 companies you're going to be covering a lot this year?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And these are companies that we have been covering a lot. I think Mark pretty much summed it up. This is meant to be a discussion starter. You know, we hope that people either agree or disagree and want to engage on what their thoughts are about the 10 hottest companies.
All right. And Rachel, can you also tell us how people can, how readers can access the full article with our full analysis of each of the companies?
Yes. So the list we published on June 29th, it is part of the July edition of Via Satellite. So it will be posted on our homepage, social media in the July edition. If you are not a subscriber to our daily newsfeed, please sign up so you can get our daily emails with industry news. And then we have a content hub via satellite.com/10 hottest companies, where you can access this video, the article, and then additional interviews that we will be doing with the 10 hottest companies.
And also, Mark and I will be featuring some of the companies on the list on our TMC, that's Thursday morning conversation videos with Mark, and also our bi-weekly podcast on Orbit. All right, well, thank you both. Congratulations to the 10 hottest companies of 2021. On behalf of Mark, Rachel, and myself, and Via Satellite team, thank you so much for watching, reading, and listening to us. Check out more of our work at viasatellite.com. Have a great summer, stay safe, and we'll see you all soon.